A silent photograph whispering secrets. Welcome to Veil Files. I am your host, Thorn. Drop a comment and share your location. I love hearing from you. Let's begin. The February fog had gathered upon Baker Street in a greyish fleece that made the lamps seem to hang like dull, yellow moons, and within our sitting room the fire burned with that steady cheer which on such mornings turns even the gloomiest of London's hours into a tolerable companion. Holmes sat cross-legged in the armchair, a violin upon one knee and an open letter upon the other. He had not tuned the first string nor broken the seal of the second, for his eyes were fixed, with that rapt expression I knew so well, upon the dancing tongues of the coal. I had been detailing for his amusement a trifling encounter at my surgery with an old pensioner who swore that a draught of liniment had cured his rheumatism because it smelt strongly of turpentine when the bell below announced a visitor. At the same instant Holmes flicked the folded letter toward me as neatly as a croupier sends a card along green baize. "You will perceive," said he, "before Mrs. Hudson ushers our client upstairs, that she, observe the fine upward script upon the address, has learned to steady her hand by resting the wrist, a retoucher's trick common with photographic colorists. The faint halo of aniline at the flap suggests the habit of moistening a brush to sharpen a blue, Prussian, I fancy, and as the stamp is half rubbed away at the lower edge, we shall have, I suspect, a very careful young lady who walks quickly in damp weather." "Holmes," I protested, "you cannot extract the weather from a stamp." "No, my dear fellow, from the mud. If a hurried hand folds a letter while the glove is yet damp, the grit adheres in the creases. But let us not deprive Miss— we shall learn the name presently— of the pleasant astonishment that awaits her." Our astonishment was not delayed. Mrs. Hudson preceded a slight young woman of sober dress, whose dark hair had escaped in one obstinate curl across her brow, and who clasped to her chest, as if it were a relic or a shield, a flat, brown portfolio. Her eyes, very clear and very tired, moved from me to Holmes with a quick, beseeching glance. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she asked timidly. "My friend is at your service," I answered. "Pray be seated. This is Dr. Watson." She took the proffered chair and, after a breath that trembled at the lips, rested the portfolio upon her lap. "I am Eliza Vale, sir. I am employed at Darnell and Sons photographic rooms on Staunton Street. I do the tinting of cheeks and the smoothing of blemishes. Mr. Darnell he has been arrested this morning. The police are saying he is responsible for, in short, for the death of Sir Peregrine Locksley." Holmes's eyelids lowered a fraction. The hand upon the violin neck stilled. "Sir Peregrine Locksley," I repeated. "The name is familiar. Of Locksley Hall in Kent," said Holmes, "and lately a director of the Avon and Coast Railway. Pray proceed, Miss Vale." "It is the photograph, sir," she hurried on. "They say the photograph points to Mr. Darnell. He swears he had never seen it until last night. But it came from our rooms, so the stamp shows, and I held it in my hands yesterday. There is nothing written upon it, no message, no words, but Mr. Darnell said the photograph speaks. And now the police have him." She bent her head and clenched her fingers until the nails whitened. "Mr. Lestrade told me he would gladly be rid of our whole trade if it could send fewer gentlemen to ruin." Holmes's mouth curved slightly. "Mr. Lestrade is a capable officer, but he has an antipathy to anything that smacks of the studio. May we see this eloquent photograph?" Miss Vale unfastened the portfolio with a nervous haste. Within lay a cabinet card in a paper sheath, the sort with a black border and bevelled gilt edge, such as one sees upon mantels in countless parlours. She passed it to Holmes as if passing over a living thing that might start from her hand. I stepped behind his chair, for I confess the word speaks had pricked my curiosity. A gentleman sat beside a painted balustrade beneath a pastoral backdrop of clouds and a distant, improbable lighthouse. He was of late middle age, clean-shaven, with a mouth too firmly set for geniality. His coat was of fine cloth, the buttonhole empty. Upon his waistcoat glimmered a small watch chain ending in a locket of dark enamel. His gloved right hand rested upon a walking stick. The left lay, ungloved, upon his knee. You would have said that the artist had taken pains to flatter the subject slightly. The ear seemed just a trifle reduced, the cheeks enriched with the palest bloom of health. But there was no inscription, no date. At the bottom, in elegant gold letters, the legend, Darnell and Sons, Photographic Rooms, Staunton Street, Soho. Sir Peregrine, I presume, I said. Undoubtedly, Holmes murmured, turning the card over. On the reverse, a purple stamp repeated the address. A second, fainter stamp, misaligned, suggested the application of the mark more than once. He held the card to the firelight, then to the window's thin day, and lastly drew from his pocket the little lens he favoured for delicate work. I saw his nostrils narrow, as they do when a scent engages him. "You say," he addressed Miss Vale without removing the lens, "that you handled this yesterday?" "Yes, sir. It was brought in near closing, wrapped in tissue. Mr. Darnell told me to remove a scratch that marred the cheek. You can see I have smoothed it. There was nothing else to do. No retouching upon the eyes. No sharpening of the corner of the mouth. No adding of colour to the hands. Only the cheek, sir." "The left, his left, the ungloved one," Holmes said softly. He laid the card upon his palm, and, with the other hand, tapped the bevelled edge. "Watson, you perceive the border?" "It is a trifle thicker upon the right," I ventured. "Just so. The guillotine has bitten more keenly upon one side. It is unusual that Darnell's machine should be out of true. He prides himself on fastidious trimming. Observe also the faint, powder-fine residue at the bottom margin, blue aniline, as I remarked. Miss Vale, do you keep your blues in a separate well?" "Yes, sir," she stammered, surprised. "Else the red would sully it." I lay a dab upon clean paper to test it. "And is your paper watermarked?" She nodded, puzzled. "'Tis stamped R.W. King, but how—" "We shall come to that. Tell me, if you please, how the police connect this card to murder." Miss Vale clasped her hands. "Sir Peregrine was found last night, in his chambers off Strand, dead at his desk. They say he was strangled with his own cravat, yet there was no sign of struggle. Upon the desk lay this photograph, sir, and in the waste-basket the sheath in which I had placed it. See, the same paper. Mr. Darnell had seen the news of Sir Peregrine's death by the morning's first editions, and when Mr. Lestrade arrived at our rooms an hour later with constables, he found the second stamp upon the back and said, 'A neat advertisement, Mr. Darnell, of your personal vengeance.' They took him at once." "On what further ground?" asked Holmes without looking up. "There was a letter addressed to Sir Peregrine, which the porter remembered delivering in the afternoon. It bore our stamp in the corner, one of our promotional slips. Mr. Darnell does that sometimes. He sends to gentlemen who have been photographed with us to encourage their friends. Mr. Darnell protests he sent none yesterday. Mr. Lestrade said he will protest at Bow Street. I begged him to send me to you." Holmes set the lens down and leaned back, steepling his fingers, the photograph between them like some odd playing card. "It is a curious thing," said he, "to be murdered by a studio's reputation. You say Sir Peregrine's picture came to you near closing. Who brought it?" "A boy in a butcher's apron," she answered. "He would not give his name." "He said the gentleman desired the scratch removed with haste and would call for it at 9 o'clock. But he never came." Holmes's eyes brightened. "A butcher's apron is a Catholic garment, Miss Vale. It conceals many sins of the trades. Did the boy's hands smell of tallow or of brine?" Miss Vale blinked. Of brine, I think." "Excellent. And now, Watson, if you will indulge me." He placed the card flat upon his knee, and with the pad of his thumb traced the curve of the watch chain. "A studio's art is to persuade us of ease," he mused, "but where art intrudes, nature protests. You see the chain, how it drapes with calculated elegance from the buttonhole down and across the waistcoat. The curve is perfect, too perfect. No man sits so still that the metal should fall to a symmetrical loop. Miss Vale, does Mr. Darnell employ a small hook? Ah, yes, I expected as much, to pinch the chain in place. We do, sir, she replied faintly. We call it arranging the gentleman. Precisely. Here the chain protests, for the loop is reversed. It suggests the negative has been printed wrong way round, but that would throw the gloved hand to the left and the ungloved to the right. Yet here the locket shows a hinge worn by long habit on the true left. There you see? A contradiction, small as an eyelash, and yet it is the sort of eyelash that lodges beneath an eye until one cannot rest. I could not forbear a smile. Holmes, you would make a poet despair of ever writing a line. God forbid, he said dryly. Miss Vale, the misaligned stamp on the back tells us this card bore at one time a second mark, likely a different address or an older plate. The border's excess on the right tells us the trimming was hurried. The aniline dust tells us the blue was tested on King's paper, not yours. Finally, the pastoral backdrop. Here, his finger hovered above the painted lighthouse. Includes a maritime feature altogether foreign to Darnell's usual pyramids and draperies. May I see the sheath? She handed it with trembling fingers. He lifted it to his face. The brine we have again, he murmured, and beneath it, rose. A cheap scent, common in the Strand. The police have acted conscientiously. They have also been invited to act so. Invited? I exclaimed. Holmes rose, the photograph between finger and thumb, and smiled at Miss Vale with that rare gentleness which he reserved for the distressed brave. You have done well to come. The case appears, at first glance, a photographer's malice. I confess that the appearance is handsome, but photographs, Miss Vale, like gentlemen, can be made to sit in their best light. There is enough here to tell me that someone has contrived a picture not only of Sir Peregrine, but of Mr. Darnell's guilt. That, too, is a composition. A hansom rattled past below, and the sound seemed to summon him to action. He tossed me my hat, seized his own, and slipped the card into its sheath. We shall begin, said he, where all good studio illusions begin, behind the backdrop. Come, Watson. Miss Vale, if you will give us the exact hour at which the boy delivered his parcel, and the way he went when he left, right or left upon Staunton Street, we shall collect Mr. Lestrade and pay a visit to Darnell and Sons. The photograph speaks indeed, but it is the manner of its speech that interests me. I believe we shall find that it has been taught its lines. Lestrade received us at the threshold of Darnell and Sons with an air of suppressed triumph which did not sit ill upon him, for he is an industrious fellow, and when he believes the net already drawn, has the geniality of a host who expects his guests to admire the catch. The studio stood 2 floors above a printseller's, its stairs smelling of glue and stale varnish. Within, the ceiling ran high to admit the light, which fell cold and equitable through a breadth of frosted panes. Against one wall stood the painted scenes, ruined arch, palm court, and the pastoral with its absurd lighthouse, each hung upon rollers with cords and cleats like those of a stage. A square of boards upon trestles formed the platform. Beside it, an iron stand held the camera, its black cloth thrown back like a dropped mantle. A guillotine trimmer stood near the window, and about it lay the drift of a craftsman's day, slivers of card, a dabbed tile with drying colours, and the small hooked pin Miss Vale had named, that servant of the well-appointed chain. Mr. Darnell himself, a narrow man with a parchment brow, sat upon a chair with his wrists linked by a modest chain. He rose when we entered, and at sight of Holmes his reserve broke into an anxious civility. "Mr. Holmes," he cried, "if truth can be done here, do it quickly, for I have neither known nor harmed Sir Peregrine Locksley, and yet I am like to be shown at Bow Street as if the very camera had been pointed at murder." "You shall not be pointed at anything," said Holmes lightly, "until it is focused. Good morning, Lestrade. Your man looks more like a victim of fashion than of justice." "Fashion or no, Mr. Holmes," returned Lestrade, "there's our stamp on the card, there's the sheath from this very table, and there's the dead gentleman with the picture set before him like a mirror to his last offender. Mr. Darnell, if you will be quiet, you shall be served best." Holmes drifted rather than walked across the floor, all idle curiosity to the eye, but I saw the quick, bird-like pecks of observation. Here, at a pin's head, freckled with verdigris, there at the edge of a blade. He ran a finger along the trimmer's fence, then lifted it to his nostrils, stooped, and from the grey litter chose, with the delicacy of a lady lifting a thread from a cuff, a single narrow shaving of card. He turned it to the light. This, Lestrade, you will observe, shows gilt on one face and a residue of gum upon the other. It is no more than the shoulder of a bevel. And here, Watson, take it. Do you not see a ghost of letters? They have been sliced, so that we have but the feet of them like gulls seen at a distance, the tail of an H, the bottom of an I, no, perhaps of a T, and what might be the lower curve of a capital W. There are few London studios that employ a capital W in their imprint. We will keep this. Lestrade smiled a little. If the imprint is not Darnell's, why is his stamp upon the back? The same reason that one sticks a paper rose into a buttonhole in winter, said Holmes. One wishes to persuade the passer-by that one's season is generous. He had crossed to the painted lighthouse. You favour the sea today, Mr. Darnell. I do not favour it at all, the man burst out. We keep the scene because it is fashionable with ship's captains and those who fancy themselves travellers. But the gentleman's portrait, Sir Peregrine's, was not taken here. It is of a different quality, if any but a photographer could tell, and the card it is mounted upon is of a sort we do not use. I said as much. They called it quibbling. Holmes had already slipped behind the drop. Watson, oblige me. He indicated the bottom edge of the canvas. It grazed the floor, and beneath it, where the cord had rubbed its little furrow in the dust, there lay grains that were not of the studio's common dirt, paler, crystalline, and mixed with darker smears. He tapped them upon his nail and placed them upon his tongue with a grimace of experiment so quick that I barely protested. Salt, he said, and tar. The drag of a rope that has slept in brine. You have had nautical boots upon your boards of late, Mr. Darnell. We had a family from Limehouse, Miss Vale put in quietly, for Lestrade had allowed her to stand near us under his glance. The father works at the docks. Which family stood before the lighthouse? No one this week, sir. It sticks. We do not pull it down unless asked. Holmes crouched at the cleat and lifted the cord. It sticks, he repeated. Yet there is a clean track upon the roller, where the canvas has lain fresh to its pole. There, Lestrade, see the brighter wood? It has been raised and lowered since yesterday. Who asked for the sea? Whoever brought that card, said Lestrade with some heat. We cannot keep plays within plays all day. Mr. Holmes, if you must pick at grains, pick at the grain of the rope that strangled Sir Peregrine. That is worth your salt. I shall come to your rope, Holmes returned serenely. First, a morsel of blue. He had moved to the little tile upon which Miss Vale's dabs of colour dried, and with the blade of his penknife he loosened a flake and held it against the card in the cabinet mount, which Lestrade, with official reluctance, had allowed him to bring. Aniline it is, and aniline it was, but our dab is clean and granular, while that upon the card's border is smutty, as when applied from a loaded, overused well. Tell me, Miss Vale, you test your blue upon King's paper? Yes, sir. Holmes opened a drawer with a lawful glance at Lestrade, who shrugged and drew forth a sheaf of trial sheets watermarked R.W. King. He set them gently upon the table. And yet, he said, there is a piece missing. Miss Vale flushed. I took a sheet yesterday. Mr. Darnell had told me to put haste upon the gentleman's face. I pulled a fresh one for cleanliness. You are a careful young lady. Where is the sheet? She bit her lip in distress. I wrapped the card in it, sir, to keep away dust. I brought it. Well, here is the portfolio. Holmes untied the strap and shook it lightly. Nothing fell from it but a breath of rose and, fainter now, the brine that had offended him earlier. No matter, Lestrade, you have the sheath you found in Sir Peregrine's waste-basket? Lestrade produced it, watchful as a mother cat. Holmes brought it under the window. Rose again, a cheap scent, and too liberally used. It is the same nose as Miss Vale's portfolio. Our messenger is not a man to be trusted with a subtle perfume. He dips. Then your messenger is a woman, said Lestrade. That will fit with nothing we know. On the contrary, said Holmes, it will fit with the strand. He set down the sheath, took up the shaving from the trimmer, and slipped both into his case. Now, before we leave you, Mr. Darnell, one question. Have you lately advertised to those who have sat to you circulars, slips, or the like? We have, sir. We sent a dozen last month to gentlemen who took cabinet cards for presents, but none yesterday. I had no time. I was with a wholesaler on Holborn. We shall verify your travels. Meanwhile, Lestrade, when you searched these rooms, did you overturn the waste pot beneath the trimmer? Lestrade's brows came together. We did not examine every dustpan in Soho. Pity? There are dustpans that speak, said Holmes. Come, Watson. The dead gentleman obliges us to pay him a call. It was one of those brittle afternoons when the light is meagre without being melancholy. We left Soho for the Strand, and I could not but note, as we alighted before Sir Peregrine's chambers, that the street smelt faintly of that same conjugal of brine and rose. A flower-seller washed her pans under a hydrant. A lad in a stained apron hurried by with a pail. The porter at the door knew Lestrade and admitted us with resentful importance. The room in which Sir Peregrine had died looked upon the bustle through tall windows. The desk stood square to the light, cleared now, save for a blotting pad, an inkstand, and the dull rectangle of clean wood where the photograph had lain. There was little confusion, and that in itself was sinister. The man had been taken with swiftness and certainty. Lestrade gave us the outline in his dry, professional tone. The cravat drawn tight from behind, the chair pushed back and then straightened by officious hands, the doctor's examination, the absence of marks upon the knuckles. Robbery? I asked. His purse and ring were there, said Lestrade. His watch was not. Holmes had bent over the desk. His watch, he repeated. Describe it. A gold watch, gentleman's size, and a small locket on the chain of dark enamel. The clerk, Sir Peregrine's nephew, Mr. Julius Locksley, identified it from habit. He is much cast down. Holmes's eyes, quick and grey, shot me a look. You observe, Watson? Our locket walks, the picture shows it alive, and, well, a man who is to be strangled removes not his own watch, therefore someone cared for that locket. Why? Because it holds a miniature, I suggested. Possibly. Or because it holds a key. He had taken up the blotter and turned it. A fine powdery stain smudged its corner. He touched it with the point of his knife, then altered his face as a taster does who finds a subtlety. Blue, he said, a trace only, and not of this desk's ordinary commerce. We have brought the sea to shore, Lestrade, and the studio to the Strand. Lestrade sniffed. It brings us no nearer to hands upon a throat. It brings us as near as a fishmonger's apron, Holmes returned. Miss Vale told me the boy who brought the card smelt of brine and turned to the right upon leaving Staunton Street. From this door he had crossed to the window and looked out upon the flow of feet. There are half a dozen shops in which brine is a constant guest, but from Darnell's to the right leads toward Berwick Street Market. There a lad may wear a butcher's apron and yet sell herring. We shall go there now, said Lestrade, unless your Bow Street cannot spare the time for the living in its zeal for the dead. Holmes's manner had sharpened into that dry edge, which I knew to be the cover of inward energy. One moment first. He passed behind Sir Peregrine's chair, knelt, and with the care one gives to a cracked egg, lifted a thin thread from the floorboards, no more than an inch, catching it upon the end of his blade. He held it up. Silk, he murmured, shot with black. The cravat was drawn from behind by one who gripped low and pulled steady. No jerk, no panic. A professional hand, Watson, or a practiced one. We left the chambers and took a hansom eastward. The tide of London ran against us. Holmes sat forward, those long fingers drumming an inaudible tune upon the rail. "Consider our picture," he said suddenly. A watch chain in an impossible loop, an ungloved left hand that had been smoothed, a backdrop of a sea not commonly favoured here, a misaligned stamp, and a trimming that has cut away another man's name. Add a sheath that smells of rose and a boy of brine. Someone has made a photograph into a statement, but the statement is not Mr. Darnell is guilty. It is, look at Darnell and do not look elsewhere. Where, then, is elsewhere? The sea, I ventured. The sea, or a man who carries it about with him, said Holmes. We shall ask a boy. Berwick Street, when we reached it, hung with the day's provisions. Rabbits and fowls with their papered tails, strings of onions, and on the fish stalls slabs of haddock upon cracked ice, their eyes glassy as if from dreams of the deep. Among these bustled boys in aprons stiff with salt, laughing, quarrelling, running with pails. Holmes did not walk so much as angle, letting the stream carry him whilst he watched for that eddy, which betrays a leaf that does not flow like the rest. Once he paused to take up a pail and hand it to a child, once to admire a knife's edge, and then, with a low exclamation, he seized my sleeve. A lad of 15 came slantwise out of a stall, wiping his hands upon a forearm white with crusted brine. There was upon his thumb a faint, improbable bloom of blue. Holmes stepped to him as an uncle might. "You are a good hand with a parcel," said he. "Yesterday, near 6 of the clock, you took a card, wrapped in paper, up to Staunton Street." The boy's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Who says so?" "The paper says so," Holmes answered, and took the boy's hand. He bent it, very gently, and with a flick of his nail lifted from the crease a minute curl of fibre. "King's make. Not many markets rap with that." The lad glanced past us, as if for escape, then back. "I'm not in for it," he muttered. "You are in for sixpence if you will tell me from whom you had the parcel and where you were to bring it after." The boy looked at Lestrade, decided he preferred Holmes's eyes, and nodded surlily. "From the gent at the Queen's Parlour, down Jersey Lane, the one with the looking-glass room. He gives ladies their picture with clouds in it. He says to take it to Darnell's and say, 'Make smooth and wait outside till 9, then bring it back if a gent with a black whisker spot comes to ask.' But he didn't a black whisker spot," I repeated. "Like this," said the boy, and dabbed the corner of his mouth with a forefinger. "He had a sailor's jacket too." I seed him later by the lamps. Holmes's face had grown very still. "By what lamps?" "The ones with the girls in feathers." It smelt like roses there. Holmes gave the lad his sixpence with another upon it. "You have earned a shilling and your dinner. If anyone asks, you saw no one." We moved away. The market clamour swallowed us. Holmes breathed once, deeply, as a diver does at the surface. "There is our elsewhere, Watson, the looking-glass room near the parlour, where they sell the likenesses of actresses to men who wish to carry the theatre in their pocket, a shabby rival to Darnell with a sea scene upon his wall and a taste for rose that could drown a dock. Add to him a sailor's jacket and a whisker stained at one corner, by tobacco, perhaps, or by dye. And what of Sir Peregrine's locket? We shall ask the Queen's Parlour whether he has ever supplied a gentleman with a locket of dark enamel to be pictured just so. If he has, we shall inquire which gentleman asked for it again last week. Come, Lestrade, we have had our studio and our chambers. Now we must have our theatre. Behind backdrops, as I told Miss Vale, there is always a story. Let us see whose lines were taught to our photograph. The Queen's Parlour stood in Jersey Lane, beneath a painted sign that once had shown a gilded crown but was now weathered to a dull ochre blotch. It was one of those establishments that flourished on the curiosity of a public greedy for the likenesses of actresses, pugilists, and scandalous society figures, rendered in the cheap dazzle of hand-coloured photographs. The glass in the front bore greasy handprints. Behind it, a mannequin's head, ill-wigged, balanced a feathered hat at a rakish angle. As we approached, Holmes slowed, his eyes sweeping the lane as though it were a theatre stage and the cast might at any moment step forward. Inside, the air was thick with a mingling of turpentine, stale tobacco, and that unmistakable rose scent which had threaded itself through the case like a refrain. A man at a counter looked up as we entered. He was stout, his cheeks florid, and his moustache a pair of untidy bristles flecked with what might have been dye or tobacco. At his elbow stood a clutter of glass frames, cheap cameo lockets, and a heap of photographs so carelessly stacked that the faces stared upward in a grotesque chorus. "Good afternoon," Holmes said with genial courtesy, though his glance travelled like a surgeon's scalpel across every surface. "We are in search of certain portraits. Perhaps you can oblige us?" The man's small eyes darted from Holmes to Lestrade and back, calculating. "We do a brisk trade, gentlemen." "The Queen's parlour has served many." Holmes's tone was light, but I knew that beneath it coiled a question sharper than any blade. "Among those many, a gentleman with a taste for a dark enamel locket. A chain arranged just so. Perhaps he sat here with the lighthouse at his back." The man shifted uneasily. We do have a seaside scene, sir." "It is popular." Holmes stepped past the counter as if idly browsing. He lifted one photograph after another, and his hand closed upon a card, mounted in gilt, similar to the one from Darnell's. It bore indeed the lighthouse backdrop, but more striking was the fact that the chain across the waistcoat of its subject was caught in precisely the same artificial loop Holmes had remarked earlier. He set it down gently. "And the gentleman here, did he perhaps leave a commission of late?" "I do not recall," the man said too quickly. Holmes's grey eyes flashed. "Then permit me to refresh your memory." He produced from his pocket the shaving of card he had taken from Darnell's trimmer and laid it against the card on the counter. The edge, the bevel, the faint remainder of a W they matched like bone to bone. The hand that trimmed this trimmed that, and the card of Sir Peregrine Locksley bore the same scar. For an instant the man's mouth worked without sound. Then he blustered. "We are rivals, sir, as any tradesman must be. If Darnell's stamp lies upon our mount, perhaps one of his people borrowed it. How should I know?" "Because," Holmes said softly, "the rose upon your coat lapel is the same rose that clings to the sheath found in Sir Peregrine's basket. You scent yourself heavily, sir, but you cannot perfume away your trade. The brine in your boards, the dye in your moustache, the very trimming of your cards, they all speak." Lestrade stepped forward with official weight. "Your name?" "Philip Cray," the man muttered, "owner of this establishment." Holmes inclined his head. "Mr. Cray, permit me to introduce Sir Peregrine Locksley, late of Locksley Hall, murdered last evening. He sat here once, did he not? And his likeness has been turned to strange ends." Cray paled beneath his florid skin, and his gaze flickered toward a door at the back. Holmes was instantly in motion, swift as I had seen him only in moments of crisis. He flung open the door to reveal a narrow passage lined with stacked backdrops, and at its end a small room no larger than a cupboard. A lamp smoked upon a table. On it lay a scattering of photographs, some defaced, some overpainted. Among them, unmistakable, was another image of Sir Peregrine, this time reversed, the locket upon the opposite side, the gloved hand wrong. Holmes held it aloft. "Watson, observe." The negative printed wrongly and then corrected by trimming to pass as Darnell's. A clumsy sleight of hand, yet enough to deceive the hurried glance. But why? "That, Mr. Cray, is what we shall learn." Cray sagged into his chair as if the strength had been drawn from him. "I had no hand in the death," he said hoarsely. "I was paid. Paid to deliver the card to Darnell's, to make him seem guilty." "I never knew the gentleman was to die. Who paid you?" Holmes asked. The man's eyes flicked once more to the door, but Holmes's gaze pinned him. He swallowed. A sailor! Called himself Briggs. Tall, with a patch at the corner of his mouth. He came a fortnight past, said he would have Sir Peregrine's likeness copied. Brought the enamel locket too for accuracy. Said he would return. He returned 2 days ago, gave me coin, told me to prepare the card and have a boy carry it to Darnell's with instructions. That is all. And the locket? Holmes's voice cut like steel. He took it with him. Holmes's eyes were alight, the grey depths sharpened to brilliance. Then we have our man, Watson. A sailor, smelling of brine and roses, marked at his whisker and in possession of the very locket stripped from Sir Peregrine's body. The photograph was his weapon, not of death, but of distraction. Lestrade was already bustling, signalling a constable to remain with Cray. We shall put the word among the river police. A sailor with that description will not slip us long. Holmes raised a hand. Caution, Lestrade. Too hasty a net may frighten the fish. Better to bait the hook. This Briggs has gone to elaborate trouble to misdirect suspicion upon Mr. Darnell. He will not vanish until he is sure the man swings in his stead. Therefore he will remain close. We must learn what tie bound him to Sir Peregrine, and to that locket. As we emerged into the lane once more, the late afternoon fog had thickened to a damp shroud, muffling the cries of vendors and the rattle of wheels. Holmes walked swiftly, his head bent, hands thrust deep in his pockets, the very image of abstraction. At last he spoke. Watson, reflect. Sir Peregrine was a director of the Avon and Coast Railway. Such posts are fertile in enemies, schemes, speculations, ruined men. A sailor does not, by mere chance, possess his portrait and locket. There is history here concealed, and the locket, an object of sentiment or of secrecy. Enamelled lockets often hold more than faces. They may hold a cipher, a key, or a token, dangerous to the wrong man. Until we open that locket we cannot know, but Briggs values it, enough to kill. We reached Baker Street as the lamps burned blurred halos in the fog. Within, Holmes flung himself into his chair, eyes gleaming. He drew from his pocket the reversed photograph taken from Cray's room, studied it in silence, then tossed it onto the table. Watson, you see before you the ghost of a crime. A photograph that has been made to lie, a sailor who wishes the lie believed, and a dead man whose watch chain may conceal the truth. Tomorrow we shall call upon Julius Locksley, the nephew. Blood often knows more than it will admit. I confess that as I wrote my notes by the fire that evening, I felt the stir of dread. For all Holmes's calm reasoning, there was in the figure of the sailor Briggs, moving through the fog with his rose scent and brined hands, something of the predator. And I wondered, as I closed my notebook, whether the photograph had indeed spoken without words, or whether it was yet speaking still, telling us that death was not finished with its message. The following morning broke clear and sharp, the fog dispersed by a night wind, and the streets shone with that peculiar brightness which comes when the air is washed clean of soot, and the pavements still glisten from the rain. Holmes was already in motion when I descended from my room, his breakfast untouched save for a solitary cup of coffee, his gaze intent upon a sheet of foolscap on which he had traced, in his small, precise hand, a series of notes and arrows like a strategist arranging troops upon a battlefield. He looked up only long enough to thrust his arm into his overcoat and bid me eat with haste, for the morning promised revelations that could not be delayed. "We are bound for Lincoln's Inn," he said when I joined him. "The nephew, Julius Locksley, keeps chambers there. A young man who has lost an uncle violently may be eager to talk, or, if complicit, eager to conceal. In either case he will be instructive. Remember, Watson, it is not always the criminal who hides most. Sometimes it is the innocent, for they fear shadows they cannot name." We hailed a cab and drove through streets quickening with commerce, vendors crying their wares, clerks hurrying with ledgers tucked beneath their arms, the city resuming its endless tide of industry. When we reached the inn, we found Mr. Julius Locksley in a narrow set of rooms whose shelves groaned with law reports and dusty volumes, though their owner bore none of the gravity of that profession. He was a pale, anxious youth of 25, his thin hair slicked to his scalp, his cuffs frayed. At our introduction, his hand trembled slightly as it clasped mine. "My uncle's death has shaken me greatly," he said, with a nervous glance at Holmes. Sir Peregrine was severe but just. "To be struck down so," he faltered, then sat heavily. "Mr. Lestrade has already questioned me. I do not see how I can assist further. Every thread is useful when one is weaving a pattern," Holmes replied gently. He took a chair opposite, his long fingers steepled. "Your uncle was a man of affairs. He sat upon the board of the Avon and Coast Railway, did he not?" "Yes. He was respected for his firmness in investment matters. Firmness is often another word for enemies," Holmes observed. "Had he quarrelled of late with anyone in particular?" The young man hesitated, then shook his head. He was discreet. "But I believe there were disputes over a contract for new lines near the coast. He said once that a rival company had tempted one of his colleagues into betrayal." Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did he name that colleague?" "No, only that he held proof strong enough to ruin a man if revealed. He carried it always, he said, close to his person." Holmes leaned forward. "In a locket?" The colour fled from the youth's face. "You know of it?" "I have seen mention of such a trinket," Holmes said smoothly. "Describe it." "An enamel locket, black with a silver rim. My uncle guarded it obsessively. I assumed it held a miniature of my late aunt, but once, when he thought himself unobserved, I saw him open it and study not a picture, but what seemed a folded slip of paper. He closed it instantly." Holmes gave a faint smile as one who hears an expected note in a symphony. "And the locket was taken from him when he died." "That paper, whatever its contents, was worth murder." "Do you recall whether your uncle had dealings with sailors or men of the docks?" "Only through the railway, sir. The Avon and Coast contracts with shipping companies. I cannot say more." Holmes rose. "You have said enough. Guard yourself, Mr. Locksley, for a man who has slain once for a secret will not hesitate to strike again if he thinks it's still endangered. Keep your doors bolted at night." The young man murmured a promise, though it was plain his nerves were unsettled. As we stepped back into the quadrangle, Holmes turned to me with that sudden alacrity which meant his mind was leaping forward. "Watson, the web clears. Sir Peregrine possessed proof of treachery on the railway board, proof which he carried in his locket. A sailor, Briggs, was employed to obtain it. But why should a sailor care for corporate disputes? He is no investor. He is the hired hand, the executioner's tool. The brain lies elsewhere. And the attempt to incriminate Darnell?" I asked. "A feint designed to occupy the police while the true quarry secured the document. Consider, Watson, to murder a man in his chambers is bold, but to murder and then plant a photograph pointing to another is subtler still. It is a mind of cunning, but not of refinement. Hence the clumsy trimming, the overdone rose scent, the obvious misaligned stamp. Our adversary is clever enough to mislead, but not to perfect the deception." We walked in silence for a time, each absorbed in thought, until Holmes suddenly hailed another cab. "To the Avon and Coast Railway offices," he told the driver. "It is time we learned who profits by Sir Peregrine's silence." The building on King William Street was a grand edifice of stone, its doors polished, its clerks brisk in dark coats. We were admitted to the director's room by a secretary who, recognizing Holmes's name, offered little resistance. Within, 3 gentlemen sat conferring in hushed tones. They rose stiffly at our entrance. Holmes's introduction was brief. "I come on behalf of the late Sir Peregrine Locksley to inquire into his affairs." A tall, hawk-nosed man with penetrating eyes, Mr. Markham, the chairman, spoke first. "This is a tragic business. Sir Peregrine was an honour to our board. If you seek enemies, Mr. Holmes, you will find none here." "Enemies are sometimes best disguised as colleagues," Holmes replied evenly. "I have reason to believe Sir Peregrine carried evidence of a fraudulent contract. Do any of you know of such a matter?" The three exchanged uneasy glances. At last, a stout gentleman with ruddy cheeks cleared his throat. There was some talk of irregularities in the coastal extension. A bidder named Chalmers was suspected of bribery. "But nothing was proved, Chalmers," Holmes repeated softly. "And who vouched for him?" Again that significant silence. Then Markham said curtly, "Sir Peregrine alone pressed the matter." He was overzealous. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Or simply correct. "Gentlemen, should you hear of a sailor called Briggs, you would do well to remember this conversation." We took our leave, and once in the cab again, Holmes turned to me. Markham's eyes betrayed him. "He knows more than he admits. I suspect he, or one close to him, employed Briggs to recover the incriminating document. If so, the chain runs from boardroom to dockside, a neat arrangement. Then Briggs still holds the locket. Unless he has delivered it. But he lingers, Watson, he lingers. A hired hand would vanish once paid. Yet Briggs hovers in the Strand, seen by our boy after the crime. Why? Either he has not yet parted with the locket, or he means to use it for his own gain." We returned to Baker Street, where Holmes fell into deep contemplation, his fingers restlessly twitching as if plucking unseen strings. I wrote up my notes, watching him pace, until at last he spoke. "The theatre, Watson, the Queen's parlour?" Briggs was seen there amid the lamps and feathers. Why should a sailor frequent such a place save to meet an accomplice? Tonight we shall return, not as ourselves, but in such guise as will pass unnoticed. There, perhaps, our sailor will show his hand. That evening, clad in less respectable coats and with hats pulled low, we slipped into the garish byways where the music halls spat out their patrons and the perfume of roses mingled with gin. Holmes had transformed himself into a shabby clerk, his posture slouched, his beard untidy. I, with some reluctance, adopted the role of a medical tradesman seeking diversion. The Queen's parlour was aglow, its windows bright, and within the air heavy with smoke and laughter. Among the crowd of idlers and loungers, a figure caught Holmes's quick eye, a man tall, broad-shouldered, his dark whiskers marred by a patch at the corner of his mouth. He leaned against the counter, speaking low to Philip Cray, who nodded nervously. Holmes's hand touched my arm. "Briggs," he whispered. "The play advances." We edged closer, feigning interest in the photographs upon the wall. I could hear now the low growl of the sailor's voice. "You'll keep your mouth shut, Cray?" "I've no mind to swing for another man's folly." "The locket's safe with me, and by heaven, I'll have twice the price before I part with it." Holmes's eyes burned with sudden fire. He drew back slightly, his lips shaping the words "only for me." "The bait wriggles upon the hook. We must wait. He has not yet shown to whom he will sell." And so we lingered in the smoky den, the hum of laughter and music throbbing about us, while the sailor Briggs, unaware that the keenest eyes in London watched his every motion, moved nearer to the moment when his secret would betray him. Briggs shifted his weight at the counter, his hand slapping once upon the wood for emphasis, and Cray flinched as though struck. The murmur of their voices carried no further, but Holmes's eye caught every twitch of muscle, every dart of glance, and I could see from the stillness of his frame that his mind was catching each fragment as a fisherman lets the current carry the net before drawing it taut. The sailor's coat smelt strongly of tar and stale gin as we edged nearer, and when he turned half aside I noted, even in the dim light, the small protrusion at his breast pocket where something square and hard pressed against the fabric. Holmes saw it too, for a spark kindled in his gaze. Presently Briggs drained the glass that stood at his elbow and jerked his chin toward the side passage. Cray nodded nervously and shuffled after him, his bulk moving like a guilty shadow. Holmes tugged my sleeve and we slipped through the crowd, emerging just in time to see the two men vanish into a narrow alley lit by a single gas jet. The fog had thickened again, softening every outline, but their voices came clearer now. "You'll have it ready," Briggs growled. "I'll not wait on your cowardice." Tomorrow at dusk the locket goes to the man who will pay, and no questions. If you cross me, Cray, I'll see you sleep under the river." Cray stammered something inaudible, and Briggs gave a short, ugly laugh before striding away into the night, his boots ringing on the cobbles. Cray lingered, wiping his face with a trembling handkerchief, then turned back toward the parlour. Holmes waited until he was gone, then stepped lightly into the alley, stooping to study the ground where Briggs had paused. A small, dark fleck clung to the stone. Holmes touched it with his finger and sniffed. "Tobacco," he murmured. "Coarse cut, sailor's blend. But more, see here, Watson." He pressed the residue between his fingers and held it beneath the light. Damp, recently wet. He carries the locket close, and the paper within has likely been handled. Briggs is impatient. He means to use it himself unless prevented. We returned to Baker Street well after midnight, the city quieting into its uneasy slumber. Yet Holmes's mind was aflame. He paced before the fire, his dressing gown drawn close, the reversed photograph of Sir Peregrine once more in his hand. "Consider the sequence, Watson," he said, his voice taut with suppressed excitement. "Sir Peregrine discovers proof of betrayal among his colleagues, proof he guards in his locket. Word of it leaks to those concerned. They employ Briggs to obtain it. Briggs contrives with Cray to produce a counterfeit photograph, placing suspicion upon Darnell and distracting the police. The murder is accomplished, the locket taken, but instead of surrendering it to his masters, Briggs holds back. He smells a richer prize, blackmail. Tomorrow at dusk he will sell to whom? I asked. That is the question. If to the board conspirators, we shall know the guilty at once. If to another, the circle widens. But Briggs will not trust Cray with the meeting. He will choose a public place, shadowed yet accessible. We must be there. I slept little that night, haunted by the thought of the dark sailor with the patch at his whisker, the locket burning in his pocket like a coal. The next day was spent in restless preparation. Holmes dispatched notes in his rapid hand, one to Lestrade urging caution, another to an inspector of the river police with whom he maintained an acquaintance. He then set about an examination of the reversed photograph, employing chemicals and magnifying lenses until my head swam. At last, he tossed it down with an exclamation. "The edges, Watson! The edges betray the haste of the copy. The fibres show it was mounted upon older stock, scraped and reused. The conspirators are not merely desperate, they are clumsy under pressure. That tells us they are men unaccustomed to crime. Businessmen, not rogues." By late afternoon, the air had grown chill and the lamps were being lit in the streets when Holmes rose abruptly. "It will be at Charing Cross," he said. "Briggs is a sailor, he will not stray far from the river. It offers escape should he be pursued, and the station provides the anonymity of crowds. Come, we must be in position." We arrived as dusk deepened to night. The great station throbbed with movement, travellers hurrying with valises, porters shouting, the hiss of steam from an engine at the platform. Holmes moved among them with the ease of a shadow, his eyes scanning every face. Presently he touched my arm. "There." Near the bookstall, Briggs stood half hidden beneath the awning, his bulk hunched, his eyes roving. He lit a pipe, the smoke wreathing upward into the lamplight. Minutes crawled by. Then another figure approached, a tall man, impeccably dressed, with the keen features of Markham, the railway chairman we had met the day before. My breath caught, but Holmes only smiled thinly. As I surmised. Markham paused, adjusted his gloves, and exchanged a few words with Briggs. I could not hear them, but I saw the sailor draw from his pocket a small black object glinting faintly beneath the lamps. The locket. Markham leaned forward, his expression tense. At that instant Holmes moved. He strode swiftly into the open, his voice ringing clear. "A fine trinket, Mr. Briggs, but it belongs to Scotland Yard." The scene erupted. Briggs swore violently and thrust the locket back into his coat. Markham recoiled, his face ashen. Briggs turned to flee, but even as he did a whistle shrilled, and Lestrade, with 2 constables, sprang from the crowd. The sailor struck out savagely, his fist felling one man, but Holmes had already seized his arm in a grip like iron. I leapt to assist, and between us we bore him down amid curses and thrashing limbs. The crowd pressed close, exclaiming, until Lestrade snapped orders and the constables clapped irons upon Briggs's wrists. Markham stood frozen, his lips moving soundlessly. Holmes straightened, his eyes cold. "And you, sir, shall accompany us. The buyer of stolen goods is as culpable as the thief, especially when the goods are purchased in blood." Lestrade, flushed with triumph, wasted no time. "You'll both come to Bow Street." "Gentlemen, take them." As Briggs was dragged away, he spat upon the ground. "You think you've won, Holmes. But there's more in that paper than you know, enough to bring down more than one fine gentleman." Holmes regarded him with that icy composure which could unnerve the stoutest villain. "We shall see, Briggs. The truth has a way of speaking louder than your threats." At Bow Street, in a small chamber lit by a single lamp, the locket was at last prized open. Within, folded with exquisite neatness, lay a slip of paper covered in Sir Peregrine. Precise hand. Holmes spread it upon the table. It was a memorandum listing dates, sums, and names, among them the name of Chalmers, the contractor suspected of bribery, and, to my shock, that of Markham himself. The sums were vast, evidence of illicit payments, and at the foot Sir Peregrine had written, "To be produced at the next board meeting." Markham slumped in his chair, his defiance broken. Briggs glared but said nothing, the chains at his wrists rattling faintly. Lestrade's satisfaction was plain. "That's the nail in their coffins, Mr. Holmes." "You've done it." Holmes, however, shook his head. "Not yet. We have the locket and the memorandum, but the hand that set Briggs upon his errand may not be Markham's alone. There are others on that board who will tremble at the sight of these names. Until we know who else stood behind this scheme, the case is not complete. Guard them well, Lestrade, and let none near the evidence save under your eye. I have still one thread to follow." As we left Bow Street in the small hours, the city silent around us, I turned to Holmes. "Surely the matter is ended. We have Briggs the locket, and Markham's guilt upon paper." Holmes drew his coat closer and smiled that thin, unreadable smile. "Ended, Watson?" "Number. The photograph still speaks, and it has not yet told us why Sir Peregrine must die at that precise hour, nor who pressed the final knot upon his cravat. Until then, the game remains unfinished." Holmes was in one of his long silences as we drove back to Baker Street, the first pale strokes of dawn spreading over the housetops. His head was bent, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, the locket and its folded memorandum lying on his knee. I had learned long ago that such silences were not to be disturbed, yet even I, hardened to his abrupt lapses into thought, could not restrain a certain impatience. We had seen Briggs seized, Markham exposed, and the memorandum revealed in black and white. To me the matter seemed as complete as any case I had recorded, but Holmes's eyes had that faraway gleam which told me he stood not upon the ground of fact, but upon the thin ice of theory, and was listening for the cracks beneath his feet. When at last we reached our sitting-room, he cast himself into the armchair and stretched his long legs toward the fire. "Watson," he said quietly, "you are satisfied?" "With Briggs in custody and Markham disgraced, I confess I am." "You yourself admitted the memorandum is decisive." "It is decisive of bribery," Holmes returned, "but not of murder. The memorandum explains motive, but not method. Remember, Sir Peregrine was strangled from behind, without struggle, his cravat drawn tight in a single steady pull. Briggs is strong enough for such work, but the very strength is against him. A sailor's hand is rough, impatient. The knot would have been clumsy, the mark upon the flesh brutal. Yet the doctor remarked upon the singular neatness of the ligature. It was done with care, with professional precision. That is not Briggs. Then Briggs was but an instrument? Precisely. He was the decoy, the carrier, the fellow whose coarse bulk could be left to bear suspicion. But the true hand, Watson, that hand we have not yet seen. I frowned. And you think it belongs to someone nearer Sir Peregrine? Nearer and subtler. Consider the photograph again. It was not only to frame Darnell, it was also to occupy the eye, to turn all thought towards studios and away from boardrooms. The mind that conceived such a stratagem is one accustomed to manoeuvre, not brawl. Who would profit most by Sir Peregrine's silence? Markham, certainly. But if Markham was willing to meet Briggs in the open at Charing Cross, then he trusted Briggs too far. A cautious man does not expose himself so, unless compelled by another whose power is greater still. He rose suddenly, restless as a hawk on the perch, and began pacing. We must look to Julius Locksley. The nephew is young, nervous, and seemingly harmless. Yet did you mark his words yesterday? He spoke of the locket as though he had seen it open, and he knew there was paper within. How came he by that knowledge, if his uncle guarded it so jealously? More than that, he has now inherited both fortune and seat upon the board. The death serves him well, I started. You cannot mean the lad strangled his own uncle? Holmes's thin lips curved in that enigmatic smile I knew too well. I mean only that the possibility must be tested. A crime of such intricacy demands a mind not wholly unpractised. Youth can be bold, and desperation more so. Remember, Watson, he told us his uncle had confided suspicions but named no colleague. That was a curious detail, was it not? He knew enough to alarm, but not enough to incriminate. A neat balance, if he wished to appear candid while concealing his own part. The morning papers soon confirmed Markham's arrest, the city buzzing with scandal. Yet even as Lestrade sent word of his satisfaction, Holmes remained unsettled. By midday he had dispatched me with a note to Julius Locksley requesting an interview. The young man received me with surprise but no reluctance, and accompanied me back to Baker Street, where Holmes awaited with an air of quiet scrutiny. "Mr. Locksley," Holmes began, "we are close to the truth of your uncle's death, yet a thread remains tangled. You told us yesterday that you once saw him open the locket and read from it. Pray describe that occasion again." The youth coloured. "It was some months ago. My uncle had returned from a board meeting in a state of agitation. He retired to his study, and when I entered to ask if he required refreshment, I found him with the locket open in his hand. He closed it instantly, but not before I glimpsed a paper. Holmes's eyes never left his face." "And you recognized his handwriting?" "I did, sir." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "You are his heir, are you not?" "Yes, the estate and his shares pass to me. Then you are a fortunate man. Sir Peregrine's death, however tragic, secures you position and wealth. Yet fortune carries suspicion with it. Would you swear upon your honour that you had no part in this crime?" The young man's lips trembled. "I swear it. I loved my uncle, despite his sternness. I would never—" Holmes raised a hand, silencing him. "Very well. Forgive the question. It is my business to doubt where others trust. One more matter. On the evening of your uncle's death, where were you?" "At my chambers," Julius stammered. "I did not leave until the porter brought me the dreadful news." Holmes leaned back, his gaze distant. "We shall see. Watson, observe how the line tightens. If Julius is innocent, then the true culprit remains among the directors, perhaps one unnamed in the memorandum, but fearful of exposure. The strangling hand may yet belong to a man of law or finance, one who can dress a knot as neatly as a clerk ties a ribbon." Julius left soon after, pale and shaken. When the door closed, Holmes stood motionless, his brow furrowed. "There is one place left to search, Watson. The study where Sir Peregrine died. We saw it hastily cleared, but I would wager something remains. The dead often leave whispers behind. That afternoon we returned to the chambers near the Strand. Lestrade, though weary of Holmes's demands, granted us access. The desk was as we had left it, the blotter removed, the chair neatly placed. Holmes moved with slow precision, examining the floorboards, the skirting, the hearth. At last he halted before the window. "Watson, see here." The The curtain cord is new. The tassel shows no dust, though the rest of the room lies dulled. And the cord itself. Note the slight fraying at one point, as though a great pressure had been applied. My breath caught. You mean the cravat was not the only ligature? Holmes nodded gravely. The cravat was but the final mask. The true act was begun with this cord. A man familiar with such instruments could apply steady pressure without struggle. When Sir Peregrine was insensible, the cravat was drawn to complete the appearance of self-contained strangulation. It is neat, too neat, and who has daily acquaintance with cords, knots, and careful strangling? Not the sailor whose hand is clumsy, not the chairman who deals in ledgers, but perhaps a man trained in law, in patience, in the delicate art of appearances, someone who wished to inherit without the stain of overt violence. Julius again? I whispered. Holmes's face was grave. The evidence bends toward him, but I shall not accuse until the last word is spoken. We must trap him, Watson. Only by forcing his hand can we see if it trembles with guilt. He closed the window, turned on his heel, and strode to the door with renewed energy. Tonight we shall lay our snare. We will invite Mr. Julius Locksley to Baker Street, and we will place upon the table not only the memorandum, but the photograph itself. We shall say that hidden within the photograph lies another clue, one which points unerringly to the murderer. Then, Watson, we shall see whether his composure is that of innocence, or of a man who knows the photograph speaks against him. Thus the stage was set, and as night descended upon London once more, I felt the air itself grow tense, as though the city held its breath for the revelation to come. Julius Locksley came at the hour named, with an eagerness that strove to pass for composure and failed in the trembling of the fingers that tugged at his glove buttons. Holmes had set the stage with his habitual nicety. The photograph, Sir Peregrine seated beneath the absurd lighthouse, lay upon the centre table, its beveled edge catching the firelight. Beside it, the locket's memorandum lay folded and weighted by Holmes's paper-knife. The room was warm, the coal purred. Mrs. Hudson's footfall had scarcely died upon the stair when Holmes, all urbanity, motioned our visitor to the chair that faced the hearth. "You will oblige me, Mr. Locksley," said he, by looking closely at this card. "I have refrained from cutting the mount, though I am satisfied the thing hides a small peculiarity. It may be a watermark in the underboard, it may be a printer's figure, no matter which, since either will indicate the last handler before it came to Darnell's. I prefer that you should see it with me. A man sleeps better when he has looked his ghosts in the face." Julius attempted a smile, but his eyes slid to the fire and back to the card as a thirsty man's do to water he dare not touch. "If it will help, Mr. Holmes," he murmured, "I am at your service." "Excellent. We will take a very thin blade, Watson. The smaller of the scalpels in your case will answer." Holmes rose, then paused, as if recollecting himself. "You will find it, I think, in the drawer of my desk." "Forgive me, Mr. Locksley. The instruments of my trade stray like cats to unexpected corners. Ah, and the tea! Mrs. Hudson has it below. Be so good, Watson." It was the merest pretext, I knew it, and Julius, if he suspected, gave no sign. I crossed to the desk, slid open the drawer with deliberation, and let it close again. At the door, I turned the key noiselessly in the lock upon the outer landing, then descended 2 steps, enough to creak the stair and satisfy the ear in the room. When I returned, after a pause long enough to boil an egg, as Holmes would have put it, I found precisely what we had awaited. Julius had half risen. His right hand lay upon the card, his thumb upon the bevel. His left hovered in that foolish, useless gesture with which a man reassures himself that no one sees him. At the faint click of the latch he started, drew back as if stung, and forced his hands to his knees. But he could not force the colour from his face. It was the colour that betrayed him, and something more. Upon the tips of the first and second fingers of his right hand there bloomed a delicate, incriminating stain, the pale, disreputable blue of an aniline well. Holmes came in as if he had noticed nothing. You are patient, Mr. Locksley. I thank you. Now, if you please, he lifted the card between forefinger and thumb with the airy carelessness of a conjurer, turned it delicately and laid it down again, close enough to Julius that the young man's breath stirred the corner. You perceive, Holmes continued, that the trim is irregular, the right edge is a hair broader. A man who feared what the underboard might say would be tempted to mend matters at the fire before I set steel to it. I do not understand, Julius said, but his voice was a note higher, and he glanced again toward the grate. On the contrary, Holmes retorted gently, you understand too well. His eyes had gone to the blue upon the fingers. A trifling tint, to be sure. Miss Vale keeps it for cheeks. I dusted the bevel with it not 10 minutes ago. It is a vulgar trap, but then so is murder. Pray do not rub it upon your handkerchief. An officer of the yard is particular about linen. Julius, with a guilty start, had indeed half-drawn his handkerchief. The blue, a wicked little star, printed itself upon the white before he thrust it away. For an instant his face showed the bare truth, a flinch, a calculation, a hunted look, and then, with a desperate effort, he forced indignation over it like a mask. "This is an outrage," he cried. "You set snares for a man who came here to aid you." "If my fingers are stained, it is because I touched what you bade me look at. I did not attempt to burn anything. Your insinuation—" "Will do for Bow Street," Holmes said with sudden chill. His hand went behind him. There was the faintest stir from the bedchamber door, and Lestrade, who had waited in our inner room at Holmes's signal, stepped out with the smug gravity of an actor making his entrance. Julius recoiled to the mantel, his heels striking the fender. "Nay, Lestrade," Holmes added lightly as the detective's hand moved. "Not yet. Mr. Locksley has still the opportunity to choose his part. We have learned that the curtain cord in Sir Peregrine's chamber took a strain at one point, leaving fresh fraying. We have learned that a man could stand behind the chair, apply that cord with a steady, clerkly pressure, and afterwards dress the scene with the cravat to suggest a single neat pull. We have learned that Briggs, hired to fetch a locket, came and went like a coarse tide over a delicate device. And we have learned, his gaze flicked once more to the blue, that someone alive in this room fears what a strip of cardboard might say. Julius's eyes flashed strangely then. Anger, certainly, but something of relief as well, as if the unendurable waiting had ended. "You are clever, Mr. Holmes," he said, very low, "but cleverness is not proof." "No," Holmes returned, "it is only the hand that sets proof upon the table. The proof will be fetched now, since you force it." His voice sharpened. "Watson, the envelope." I brought the long paper envelope Holmes had prepared. He did not open it. He only tapped it once upon the card. "In here, Mr. Locksley, are two trifles. One is a thread lifted from the fresh fray of the curtain cord. The other is its twin drawn from the nap of a sleeve that brushed that cord last night. The sleeve was of black broadcloth such as lawyers and clerks favour. The thread had caught within the stitching at the elbow. I plucked it this morning when its owner rose too hastily from a chair, to which I had the impertinence to call him. It will be the simplest matter in the world to show the fibres are one." "What owner?" Julius demanded, but the question broke from him as sweat breaks, involuntary and fatal. Holmes's lids drooped. "A man who sat in that chair an hour since and swore upon his honour that he had not left his chambers on the evening of his uncle's murder." Julius's hand, blue-stained, flew to his mouth. For a heartbeat he stood rigid, then he moved with the suddenness of the desperate. He snatched at the card, made one blind rush to the fire, and would have thrust it bodily to the coals had not Holmes, whose hand is quicker than the thought that guides it, caught his wrist. The photograph spun from his grasp, slid upon the hearthstone, and lay there winking up the absurd lighthouse at us all, as if it took amusement in human folly. Lestrade was on Julius in an instant. The young man sagged, then, with an agility I should not have credited, twisted free, flung the detective aside, and sprang for the door. I had set the landing lock, but he found the knob of the inner bedchamber, slipped within like a fish, and out by the second door to the passage with a speed that would have done credit to a music hall acrobat. By the time Lestrade wrenched the outer door open, Julius's steps were already clattering upon the stair. Holmes did not curse. He seldom wasted breath upon what could not be mended. He stooped, swept up the card, and thrust it into his pocket. "Let him run," he said quietly. "He will choose his hole, and that will tell us whose hand furnished him the spade. Come, Watson." We were in the street within a minute, our coats thrown on as we went. Julius was not difficult to follow. Guilt runs loudly. He darted to the corner, across the cab traffic with a recklessness that set horses squealing, and plunged eastward at a pace that betrayed both panic and knowledge of his ground. Twice he glanced back, twice Holmes's lifted stick reassured me with its steady angle. We passed the Marylebone Road, dove through a tangle of alleys, and gained the broader current that drew toward the Strand. There the lamps were coming up, and, along with them, that cloying rose scent, which by now seemed the case's own breath. Julius hesitated, one instant no more, then struck south, away from his chambers. "Not to the inn," I panted. "No," Holmes said between even breaths, "to the river, or to a friend nearer the river." Hush now, we saw him at last slip into a narrow court between two shuttered warehouses where a single lamp made a yellow island upon the stones. Holmes drew me into the darkness of a doorway and set a finger to his lips. Julius had paused before a door with a fanlight. He rapped, not with his knuckles, but with the head of his cane, once, twice, and after a breath, thrice. The door opened a hand's breadth. A voice we could not hear spoke. The door received him and was still. Holmes's hand tightened upon my arm with that quick, fierce clasp which with him stands for triumph. "There," he whispered, and the word was a blade. "Now we shall learn whose roof shelters the strangler and whose purse paid Briggs for a photograph that speaks." Holmes's hand slipped from my arm and went to the latch as gently as a mother quiets a child. The door wore no name at eye height, but a smear upon the brass plate near the jamb, where innumerable hands had touched and a prudent cloth had lately polished, betrayed a legend faintly visible when the lamplight caught it slantwise. "Chalmers and Pike factors," Holmes breathed. "The contractor masks his den as a warehouse office. Our fish has chosen the water." He laid his palm softly against the wood. "Warm, recently closed. Note the fanlight. No soot upon the inner ledge." "The gas burns within. How are we to enter?" I whispered. By asking for a wrong man. He rapped, not with his knuckles, but with the head of his stick, echoing Julius's pattern, once, twice, and, after a measured breath, thrice. The bolt drew back a finger's breadth. A cautious voice came through the slit. "Who's there?" "A message for Mr. Pike," Holmes returned in a hushed urgency. "From the Queen's parlour. The sailor says the river is watched." There was a suppressed oath. The door opened. Holmes stepped past it with that meek self-effacement which, in him, is as dangerous as a bayonet. I followed and found myself in a narrow hall, smelling of damp canvas, tar, and a heavy perfume that had by now become the case's signature. A second door stood ajar. Voices came from beyond, one high and strained, Julius's, another low, tight with authority. "You fool," the low voice was saying. "You were to be quiet. To come here is to bring them upon us." "They were upon me," Julius cried, and the words tumbled out with the panic of a man who sees no shore. "Holmes painted my fingers blue like a schoolboy's mischief." "He has the curtain thread, I tell you. He will show it to the world and hang me from it." "Then you should have run to France, not to me," the other answered with contempt. "If you cannot hold your nerve, and leave you to wave the memorandum like a flag while I rot, you promised shares, a place, safety. If I did the thing neat, it was neat. He never struggled. I did as you said with the cord, then the cravat. Briggs was to fetch the paper and be gone. Why did you not take it from him before he thought to sell it twice?" A hand gripped my sleeve with a pressure that meant silence. Holmes's head inclined so slightly that only the shadow knew it moved. We stood just outside the lamplit office. Through the gap, I saw Julius, colourless and shaking, and facing him a compact man of middle years in a dark frock coat, his hair iron grey, his jaw clean-shaven and ruthless. On the table between them lay a ledger and, beside it, a small ebony box. The man, Chalmers, beyond question, closed the box with 2 fingers, precisely as one who is used to closing bargains. "I did not take it," he said, "because Markham chose to be a coward and sent his own hand to buy it in a crowd. He is in a cell for his pains. That may serve us yet. The memorandum is recovered by the police. Very well. We shall work without it. A scandal blows over if the money is deep enough and the public dull enough, but a strangled baronet is a different wind, my lad." "It howls." Julius's voice broke into a whisper. "Then help me. There must be passage, one of your steamers." Chalmers's eyes, cold and steady, measured him as a butcher measures weight. "Passage costs." "You will sign your shares to me. All of them, all." Julius stared, aghast. "You would strip me after I—" "You did the one thing you were told," Chalmers returned, no heat in his tone. "You obeyed a set of instructions you were unfit to understand. The rest you bungled. Shares, or you may appeal to Mr. Holmes for mercy." Holmes moved then, not into the room, but sideways, vanishing into the gloom as a fish slides beneath a stone. For a heartbeat I thought I had lost him, but his fingers brushed my cuff and drew me to a side door that gave, at a touch, upon a narrow stair smelling of cold river. "Back way," he breathed at my ear. "He will bolt if pressed. We will set the bolt." We crept down 2 steps, enough to find the iron gate at the foot chained and padlocked, then up again to the threshold outside the office. Holmes's hand dipped into his pocket and came out with a small paper packet. He shook upon the floor just where a man in haste must plant his foot, a pinch of the fine powder he uses when he would know who has crossed a certain line. From another pocket he drew what looked to be a folded handbill. He passed it to me. "When I speak, show this and say, 'River Police.' Let panic drive him against the powder." He gave the latch a brisk click and entered as if a servant bringing coals. "Good evening, Mr. Chalmers," said he, with that bright, false courtesy which in him rings like a trumpet. "Do not trouble. We are but 3 to your 2. The river gate is secured. The street door is in my friend's shadow, and if you touch that ebony box, I shall shoot you through it and save the magistrate the delay of inventory." Chalmers turned without start or colour. Only his eyes narrowed by a hair's breadth. Julius gave a choking sound and staggered back a pace, 1 pace too long. His heels slid through the pale dust Holmes had strewn. A neat crescent of his boot marked itself upon the bare boards. "What is this?" Chalmers said softly. "An end to mumming," Holmes replied. "Mr. Chalmers, I have heard enough to warp a ship's keel. You employed a dockside bravo to steal a paper. You employed a frightened nephew to silence a man who would have ruined you. You dressed the corpse with a photograph to ship the constables up Soho. You will oblige me by placing both hands upon the table, fingers open. Dr. Watson, the handbill, if you please." I held up the slip. The words "River Police Notice" stared in bold type, with a crude woodcut of a man in irons. It was an old circular. It served. Julius saw it and gave a despairing cry. Chalmers's glance flicked to the side door and back so fast that only Holmes would have caught it. "You make free with accusation," Chalmers said. "On what authority?" "On that of your own tongue," Holmes returned. "You dictated the knot, you chose the hour, you haggled terms over a corpse. Spare us the dignity, you have none left to pawn." He moved very slightly, so that the line between Chalmers and the door was no longer straight. "Mr. Locksley, you have planted your foot upon a dust I can swear to. The magistrate will be pleased to see the twin of that crescent upon your boot." Julius's knees seemed to loosen. He sank upon the nearest chair and covered his face. "It was to be simple," he said, through his fingers. "A nudge of a cord. He would sleep." I did as I was told. Chalmers's hand went, not to the ebony box, but to the drawer beneath it. Holmes saw the flecks of tendon and was there before the thought completed itself. He wrenched the drawer, and a pistol clicked harmlessly in that impotent space between hands. For the first time, anger came into Chalmers's face, a black, ugly anger. "You pest," he spat. "You rat who runs in men's affairs." "Lestrade!" Holmes called, without raising his voice. The door behind me swung wide to admit the small, solid figure of our friend from Bow Street, with two plainclothes men at his heels. He had the comfortable look of a man whose dinner has been delayed, but not denied. "I came as soon as Mrs. Hudson fetched me," said he. "Evening, gentlemen." "That drawer will do you no good, sir." He nodded at Chalmers, whose hand, arrested, still hovered near the opened space. Chalmers's eyes went to Julius, one swift, cold communication. "Say nothing," he said. Julius shook as if the words had struck him. "He promised," he began. "Say nothing," Chalmers repeated, and the steel in it might have frozen a river. Holmes, who seldom mocks when a man is beaten, was grave. "You may command in your office, Mr. Chalmers. Here, the order runs the other way." He looked to Lestrade. "You will take them both. The boardroom may provide gentlemen with silk hats, but Bow Street provides the rest of the costume. Be good enough, when you have them secured, to send a man to the Queen's Parlour in Jersey Lane. There is an ebony box's twin there which contains a handful of cards that learn to lie." Lestrade's hand fell upon Chalmers's shoulder, another upon Julius's. Yet even at the touch, Chalmers's lips curled. "You have evidence enough for a night in the cells," he said. "You will have less by morning." Holmes's smile was thin and winter clear. "On the contrary, by morning the photograph will have finished speaking." He looked down at the ledger upon the table and with a single delicate motion turned a page. "And this, which you were too confident to hide, will lend it a voice." Lestrade marched his prisoners away, and the warehouse door, freed of its tension, swung to with a sigh. Holmes stood for a moment very still, his gaze not upon the handcuffs but upon the ledger he had idly turned. Then, with that abruptness that means his thoughts have leapt the last gap, he snapped it shut, tucked it beneath his arm, and drew me out into the lane. "We have them," I whispered, elated and exhausted in equal measure. "We have their bodies," Holmes returned, "but the mind they set in motion would wriggle yet if we left so much as a nail to cling to. Come, Watson, before the law can say chain of custody, our photograph must complete its testimony." Back in Baker Street he forbade me the fire and set a kettle upon the hob. He cleared the centre table and laid the cabinet card upon a square of clean blotting. His movements were quick yet delicate, and as I had seen him draw a bullet from a man's limb with less gentleness than he now expended upon a slip of pasteboard, I knew that to him the thing on our table was as communicative as any witness. "You will recall," he said, "that our mount tells two stories. One, the broad beveled right edge, the misaligned stamp, is the clumsy lie. The other is the faint truth that clings beneath the lie. We shall invite it to the surface." He took from a drawer a shallow pan and poured into it a finger of spirit with a few drops of benzene. When the steam rose, he turned the card face down and held it above the vapour until the gum softened. Then, with a palette knife as fine as a surgeon's probe, he insinuated the blade between mount and print. The faintest lift, no more than the opening of an eyelid, and the print sighed free, exposing the naked board beneath. "There." Holmes's voice had in it the satisfaction of a chemist who has coaxed a precipitate from a reluctant solution. The underboard showed a ghostly impress of letters like a tide mark upon sand. He breathed upon it lightly and set it slant to catch the lamp. Across the lower edge, faint but legible, ran a penciled cipher, QP/6. Above it, a tiny blind stamp, no larger than a pea, had pressed a wreath, and within it a single initial W. "You remember my gulls," he murmured, and his finger traced the tiny serifs I had first seen as mere scratches upon a shaving. Our W was never Darnell's. Queen's Parlour deals in cheap stock, and cheap stock is bought by the lot from Warwick and Webb, hence the blind stamp. They trim, they scrape, they reuse. Our Mr. Cray had mounted a reversed copy upon an old Warwick card, and when his conscience, or his profit, bid him, he scoured away his own pencilled docket. But graphite sinks when gum is damp, and paper, like character, keeps the mark of what it has carried. He lifted from the print a few glistening grains with the point of a knife, and let them fall upon a glass slip. Tar and salt, he added carelessly. I dare say the paste water in Jersey Lane is fetched from a barrel that has stood too near the rope coils. Now look again. He tilted the board, and the lamplight woke a second, sharper line, a minute incision, cut with a gauge that had nicked the mount twice, leaving a twin tooth at the corner. Holmes smiled. Cray's guillotine has a worn tongue. I looked for the mark upon another of his cards this afternoon. The same twin tooth bites here. Add to it the Warwick stamp and the parlour's docket, and our speaking picture is a chorus. He reassembled the parts with that neatness which is a moral as well as a physical habit with him, weighted them while the gum cooled, and at last consigned the whole to his pocket case. Lestrade will grudge me the pleasure of the performance, he said, standing, but he shall have the credit. Come, Bow Street first, to drop this into his hands before any soft-tongued solicitor breathes upon the matter. Then Soho to scrape from Cray the last line of his part. Small men, Watson, will sing like linnets when the cat is at the window. We found Lestrade at his desk, the ledger already under his spectacled eye, and a look of sober contentment which I have learned to recognize as his nearest approach to rapture. He heard Holmes out without interruption, his mouth pursing at the mention of benzine and blind stamps. "You'll be the death of my digestion with your flimsy tricks, Mr. Holmes," he grunted at last, but his hand closed upon the reassembled card as upon a prize. "Still, this QP/6, if the magistrate asks me who put it there." "Tell him Mr. Cray wrote it in pencil on a damp day," Holmes returned. "And if he doubts you, produce Mr. Cray. He is better than a microscope." So we went to Jersey Lane, where the Queen's Parlour had its tawdry lamps still burning despite the hour. Philip Cray, under the mild compulsion of two plainclothes men and the sight of Lestrade's warrant, suffered himself to be led to his own back room. There Holmes placed the card upon the table, and with a forefinger that never trembled, drew a circle about the faint docket. "You wrote that," said he. Cray's eyes flicked left and right, and settled on the old sour rag of rose that scented his coat. "I did," he muttered. "It's our price code. 6pence for the copy. I thought I scoured it." "You scoured your way into the dock," Holmes replied without malice. "You will tell the magistrate, when asked, that you mounted this print, that you trimmed it with your nicked guillotine, and that you took a shilling from a fishmonger's lad to send it to Darnell's with a message. You will further say who bade you do so." "Chalmers," said Cray, very low, and the little hairs of his moustache trembled. "I never thought murder. I swear it." "You will have leisure to revise your thoughts," Lestrade observed, and made a note. He had, I fancied, acquired a taste for the neatness of small corroborations. By 9 o'clock the threads lay in the yard's hand like the lines of a well-ordered chart. Briggs sulked in his cell. Markham's solicitor had demanded a hearing. Chalmers and Julius, under separate guard, declined to speak. Holmes, who had neither slept nor eaten more than the crust he stole from my plate at dawn, expressed himself satisfied to the edge of good humour. "We have tightened the net upon fact," he said. "Now we must tighten it upon motive, until even a clever man cannot wriggle free by a technicality." "You have the memorandum for motive," I protested. "For bribery motive," he corrected. "But the particular cruelty, the choice of hour and instrument, the certainty that Sir Peregrine would be alone and seated so that a cord could come upon him, those belong to private knowledge. Who knew his habits down to the pattern of a winter evening?" His hand, playing with the locket upon the mantel, answered his own question. "The nephew?" I said reluctantly. And the contractor who oiled the nephew's fear, he added. Between them, a rope. But juries like their knots tied plain. We shall give them what they like. Come, Watson, one errand to Lincoln's Inn. A gentleman's valet is often more exact than a ledger. The man who had attended Sir Peregrine these 10 years received us with that blend of stiffness and injury which is a good servant's defence against bereavement. Holmes's manner, which can be icy in the face of arrogance, here softened to almost domestic patience. In 10 minutes he had, by a series of questions that seemed concerned wholly with trifles, reconstructed our dead man's evenings, the precise hour he sent his man away, his habit of taking a glass of claret and writing 1 or 2 notes before the fire, the way he preferred the left shutter unlatched for air, the place where he laid his watch when he unhooked it to wind, and, at the last, a little point that made my scalp prickle. The nephew's frequent visits at that hour, for a word, as the servant put it, whenever the baronet had had a vexing day at the board. "Thank you," Holmes said, with a gravity that paid the man in coin of respect. "You have done better for your master in this than those who wore hats at his table." As we came down the stairs, Holmes glanced once at the pale sky beyond the panes. "The day grows older with the case," he said. "By noon, Lestrade will have his warrant stamped, and by evening he will be thanked in the evening papers. Before that, we must close the circle. And how will you close it?" "By making our photograph speak aloud," he returned, and his smile had that boyish mischief which, in him, is only a mask for calculation. "At 2 o'clock we shall bring our little audience, Darnell, Miss Vale, Cray, and Lestrade, to Sir Peregrine's study. We shall set our card upon his desk, and, with the board's ledger for chorus and the locket for accompaniment, we shall ask each man to read what is before him. Some will read words, one will read a noose. Then, Watson, the picture that lied will tell the truth, and the truth will take a man by the throat more surely than any curtain cord." He took my arm, and we turned our steps once more toward the Strand, the winter sun striking wanly upon the windows in which London watches itself, and, beyond them, upon a room where a dead man's chair waited for the living to confess. At 2 o'clock we assembled in Sir Peregrine's study, that sober chamber whose air seemed still to hold the breath of the man who had sat there nightly with his ledger and his conscience. Lestrade had done his part. Mr. Darnell stood a little apart with Miss Vale beside him, pale but composed. Philip Cray, heavier-eyed than when we had last seen him, watched the floor as if it might betray him anew. The valet hovered at the door with a servant's stiff sorrow. On the desk lay the cabinet card in its sheath, the recovered locket with its folded memorandum, and, set open at a ribbon, the railway ledger Holmes had lifted from Chalmers's office. 2 constables waited in the passage. At Holmes's nod, they brought in Julius Locksley and Chalmers together. The nephew's glance travelled at once to the card. Chalmers's never left Holmes's face. "You will forgive a simple ceremony," Holmes said, his voice very quiet. "Pictures and papers have held counsel here before. We merely invite them to repeat their verdict in company. Mr. Darnell, Miss Vale, the first word is yours. Is this the card you handled yesterday?" Darnell bent with that punctilious gravity which is the pride of his craft. "It is our border and our stamp, but not our mount," he said firmly. "The trimming is not mine. The bevel is broader on the right, and the paper shows Warwick's blind stamp." "I said as much. I was called a quibbler." Miss Vale pointed with a trembling finger to the sitter's cheek. "I smoothed that scratch," she murmured. "Left cheek, his left. The dab is mine." Holmes inclined his head. "And you, Mr. Cray?" The man swallowed. "It's the parlour's stock. I mounted the copy. I trimmed it with my nicked guillotine. I wrote QP/6 in pencil for price." He flicked a glance at Lestrade and away again. "I never thought murder." "You thought profit?" Holmes returned, without heat. "The card bears your thought as a tree bears a boy's knife. Mr. Lestrade has it secure for the magistrate." He took up the photograph and balanced it lightly on finger and thumb. then let it fall once more to its place so that the bevel made a faint, square kiss upon the polished wood. A pale smudge showed where it had lain before, and another, fainter still, beneath the first. "You see how stubborn, inanimate things can be," he added. "They remember where they have rested, even when men would forget." Chalmers's lip moved. "Are we to be lulled with sleight of hand?" "With handwork, certainly," Holmes answered, and his gaze went to Julius as a blade goes to a gap in the armour. "Mr. Locksley, when we spoke at Baker Street, you denied leaving your chambers on the night your uncle died. Yet the curtain cord here shows fresh fray at one point. A twin thread sits at this moment in the stitching of your right sleeve. Its fellow was lifted from this very cord. Your boots last night took a neat crescent in a dust that only the Queen's parlour uses. You planted your heel in it when you ran to Chalmers for help. These are pebbles upon a path. Shall we follow them?" Julius's throat worked. "You cannot. On dust." "On dust, and on your own tongue," Holmes said, still without raising his voice. "You told Chalmers here, 10 minutes before Lestrade took you both, that he never struggled. You did as you were told with the cord, then the cravat. You may prefer now to say nothing. The constable who stood behind the door will repeat the rest for you." He turned half aside and, with a courtesy that might have been for a duchess, addressed Miss Vale. "Madame, you did not know it, but when you smoothed that cheek, you fixed the hour of a murder. Your blue aniline dust clung to the bevel. I laid a touch of like dust there this morning. Mr. Locksley could not keep his fingers from the card when my back was turned. The stain upon them shows what fear always shows, what a man would destroy if he dared. The first thing he looked to burn was not the ledger nor the locket, but the picture that points past Mr. Darnell to Jersey Lane, and past Jersey Lane to this room." Chalmers's cool composure contracted by the width of a hair. "A pretty oration. Where is your knot, Mr. Holmes? Show the jury their rope." "With pleasure." Holmes drew the curtain cord down, letting it run through his hands until the fresh fray lay across his palm. "Here is our instrument, chosen for silence. A clove hitch laid flat would be a sailor's signature. A slip knot is a footpad's blunder. But this, gentleman, is the document tie of a clerk, the steady pressure of a bundle cord. See, Watson, stand you in the chair I obeyed with a qualm." Holmes passed behind me and brought the cord snug about my throat, his touch as gentle as a mother's, the line lying low and even. "Thus," he said. "No jerk, no bruise, the breath checked like a candle in a draught. A man used to docketing papers could do it neat as sealing wax. He would not soil his hands. The cravat would then be drawn for the coroner's eye. Who in this room ties such knots by the dozen? A contractor's foreman? Number. A clerk, a legal nephew, a young man priding himself on precision." Julius gave a small cry, the sound, I think, his soul made when it saw the gallows. "He forced me," he gasped, and flung a shaking hand toward Chalmers. "He said my uncle would ruin me, ruin us both, with that memorandum. He promised safety, shares—" His voice fell to a whisper. It was only to be a nudge. He would sleep. Chalmers's mask cracked then, not with fear, but with the snarl of a wolf shown the trap. "You little fool," he said between his teeth. "Did I bid you run to Holmes with your fingers painted like a tart's?" "I told you to burn what might betray us." Holmes lifted a forefinger. "Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. A counsel's instinct does you credit. Unfortunately for you, the counsel arrived too late. You sent Briggs with the counterfeit to bait the yard. You sent Locksley with a cord to silence a man who would have shown this," he touched the locket, "to his board. You bargained with Markham to buy your way out when the sailor grew ambitious. You made a picture lie so that decent men would swallow a falsehood, and honest workmen, Mr. Darnell and Miss Vale, would be shamed by it. The photograph spoke twice. Once when it told me where it was mounted, and once when it told me whom it frightened most in this room. Between those two sentences, gentlemen, there is enough English to hang you." Lestrade had not moved for several minutes. He moved now with that grave, workmanlike finality which is the true dignity of his office. "You heard them," he said to the constables. "Mr. Chalmers, Mr. Julius Locksley, I arrest you for the wilful murder of Sir Peregrine Locksley and for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice." He turned to Darnell with a short nod. "You'll have your rooms back by evening, Mr. Darnell." "And you, miss—" His brusqueness softened. "You have done as well as any lady could be asked." Holmes closed the locket and laid it beside the card. For an instant the two lay there like a pair of eyes, one bright with truth, the other dulled by the pretense that had tried to blind it. "Take care of those," he said to Lestrade. "Juries like to see the things themselves when the talk is done." When they had gone, the prisoners between the constables, Cray casting a last hopeless look at the card that had betrayed him, Darnell and Miss Vale with a mixed relief that is almost fatigue, the room seemed to sink back into ordinary life. The fire burned, the rain rattled briefly at the window, and the chair before the desk was only a chair again. Holmes stood a moment with his head bowed, as if hearing a thread of music the rest of us could not catch. Then he roused, slipped the photograph into its sheath, and offered me my hat. "Come, Watson," said he, "the picture has said its say. It remains to hear what the city will make of it, and what Mr. Lestrade will make for his supper." In the days that followed, London did as London always does when commerce and crime shake hands and are found out. It gaped, it argued, and it read the evening papers with a zest which, had it been applied to the ledgers of the Avon and coast, might have spared a gentleman his life. Bow Street moved with uncommon dispatch. Briggs, whose temper was as short as his foresight, pleaded to his part in the theft and the planting of the counterfeit card. Markham, cornered by the figures in Sir Peregrine's memorandum, took refuge in legal distinctions that would not stretch to murder. It was Chalmers and Julius Locksley who made the day's true drama, the contractor, cold as marble save when passion cracked his surface, and the nephew, whose courage ebbed the moment he stood without his tutor. When the trial came on, Julius, pressed by the cord and the dust and his own ill-chosen flight to Jersey Lane, turned Queen's evidence with a suddenness that surprised no one who had watched his hands. The jury took little time. The rope Chalmers had described so confidently to others in private was, in public, measured to his own neck. Julius was spared the drop, but neither liberty nor honour. Mr. Darnell walked free from the court amid such a murmur as might greet a singer restored to the stage after slander. Miss Vale, crimson-cheeked and bright-eyed, had from the magistrate a word which, I think, did her more good than any advertisement. Philip Cray, who had played the mountebank with cards, found that a mountebank's grimace does not profit in the dock. His fate was lighter than it might have been, for his cowardice had stopped short of the strangler's knot. As for the board, it pruned its branches hastily. New names appeared upon the brass plate in King William Street, and the ink that recorded them was still tacky when the newspapers announced the company's renewed probity. It was upon a quiet evening, some weeks after the verdict, that I found Holmes in his chair with the photograph before him, as a botanist will sometimes keep a pressed leaf, because though it is no longer green, it bears the shape of a summer that taught him something. He pushed the card toward me with his stick and smiled. "You see, Watson, how eloquent it remains even now that the last of its words has been spoken." "I see a chain loop too neat to be nature," said I, falling into his humour. "A lighthouse no sane London studio would paint in preference to a drape, a border cut too heartily on one side, and, if I look close enough, the ghost of Warwick's wreath." But I confess it was not the card but the cord that lasted with me. The way you set it about my throat there, in Sir Peregrine's chair, and how quietly a man may go out if only the hand behind him is practised. Holmes's eyes softened. It is not a pleasant memory even when acted. Yet it answered the last of our questions. 3 minds moved in that room on the night. The coarse mind that sets a decoy, the cunning mind that chooses a silent instrument, and the mind that thinks itself safe because it has taught the lie to speak. Between them, the truth found air enough. I turned the card once, twice, and felt again that little shiver which had first run through me when Miss Vale placed it in Holmes's hand. "Tell me honestly," I said. "At what moment did you see the nephew?" "The first instant he told me more than he had any right to know," Holmes returned. He thought himself discreet, and so he was, by halves. A man who says, "I once saw my uncle open a locket and study a paper," has either peeped or been shown. Sir Peregrine was not a peacocking sentimentalist. He would not show a miniature, still less the proof of another's guilt. That and the clerk's hand in the knot. Remember the doctor's remark upon the neatness of the ligature. The sailor's fist leaves uglier signatures. When I saw Julius's gaze slide to the fire the first time the card lay near it, I knew where to set my pinch of blue. "The blue was a child's trap," I protested, laughing. "All the better," said Holmes. "Children's traps catch children." The wiser device was in Soho, Warwick's blind stamp, the parlour's nicked guillotine, the brine and rose that ran like a chorus through the case. "You spoke then, I think, of the chain loop?" That was our first whisper. Art prides itself on correcting nature, but nature resents it and will find a way to complain. When a watch chain drapes too perfectly, it may be because a hook has pulled it against gravity, or because a copyist has reversed the negative and thinks symmetry a substitute for truth. We sat a while, and the old room, with the smoke rising in 2 even feathers from the grate, seemed to fold us in its habitual peace. Outside, a coster's cry came faint and friendly up Baker Street. A hansom rattled past, and a woman's laugh trailed like a ribbon after its wheels. Holmes reached to the mantel and toyed with the recovered locket, now emptied of peril and replete with moral. "There was justice in Sir Peregrine's stubbornness," he said. "He carried proof not to threaten but to cleanse. That it cost him his life is a black business. That it did at last accomplish what he meant for it, there is a kind of economy in that." "You are charitable to the dead," I said. He shook his head. "I am practical about the living." "You saw how Chalmers looked at Julius?" "There is always a man who will cut another's soul to fit his own purse. We are not required to admire that, but we must allow it when we calculate." The photograph's lie would have stood had we been content to ask only who printed it. It was when we asked who feared it that it began to speak. Fear is the surest ink. I could not forbear a smile. "And Lestrade?" "He will accept that phrase for his report." Lestrade will accept the card and the cord and go to his supper with the contentment of a man who has earned it. He does well what he is meant to do. He fastens the buckle when another has threaded the strap. We may each be grateful for the other's function. He rose then, with that sudden elasticity which comes to him when a case has closed like a well-fitted lid. "Darnell sent this," he added, indicating a small parcel upon the table. A cabinet likeness of the two of us, if you will credit it. Miss Vale did the tinting. She has a steadier hand than either of us. I opened the parcel and could not suppress a laugh at the gravity with which we were presented. Holmes with his profile like a hawk's over the violin he had not quite remembered to tune, and myself, formal and foolish beside him, as though the camera had surprised us in one of those silences when I am thinking what to write, and he what to do. "It flatters me," I said. "It does you no justice." "Then it is a fair average," Holmes answered, and his eyes twinkled. "Photographs are like reputations. They improve the worst of us and betray the best. Burn it, if you like. The mantle holds enough reports of your hero already." "I shall keep it," I replied, slipping it into my medical case where it lies to this day between a lancet and a visiting card of Mycroft's. It will remind me that paper, whether printed or mounted, does not lie so much as it tells the truth to those who listen. Holmes's smile thinned to that inward look of his which I have learned to translate as satisfaction. He crossed to the window and stood a moment with his shoulder against the frame, watching the last of the day bleed into a band of dull crimson over the chimney pots. "There is a string quartet in Hanover Square tonight," he said. "I have a fancy for it. When men have tugged at chords all month, it is a relief to hear others plucked in tune." "You will dine first?" I asked, for Mrs. Hudson had hinted at a steak. He shook his head. "Music is meat." Then, catching my protest, he relented. "A slice of the steak, Watson. You shall have the larger portion. After that, let London keep its photographs and its ledgers. For a few hours we will have truth without words." We dined, he dressed, and when he had gone I sat a little while longer with the locket and the card upon the table between my hands, thinking of a steady young woman who smoothed a scratch, and in smoothing it pricked the conscience of a city, of a frightened nephew who tied a neat knot and thereby tied his own fate, of a contractor who thought accounts were the beginning and end of the world, and of my friend who hears what paper says when the rest of us hear only the rustle. Then I put the things away and took up my pen, for a photograph had spoken, and it would have been ungrateful not to write down what it said.